Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard Al, and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. I invite you to scroll through my extensive catalog of more than 130 awesome interviews and listen on any podcast app or at the website aarecoveryinterviews.com. Every episode is unique, inspiring, engaging, and meaningful. Each story is a powerful testimonial of the recovery available to all in AA. And if you like what you hear, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Today is an encore episode of my interview with Amanda B. from September 2021. Amanda got sober in February 2018. For today's interview, I'm pleased to welcome Amanda B. to the show. Like many of my other guests, Amanda's first experience with alcohol was in early adolescence. Half a bottle of Crown Royal left her sick and passed out on the bathroom floor in a pool of vomit. Yet she could not wait to do it again, with any liquor but Crown Royal. From there, she rapidly progressed in her drinking and drug use. By 15, she had escaped her childhood home and went to live with a drug-dealing boyfriend. When that didn't work out, she moved in with her grandparents, but drugs and alcohol barged back into Amanda's life, and she soon found herself on a downward trend into heavy drinking. She went to work in a bar, which allowed her to drink more, with little consequences, save the occasional firing. She somehow managed to live on her own in an apartment across the street from the bar to cut down the risk of DWI. But the darkness of the disease descended into her life, and by her late 20s, she had lost about everything and had to live with her sister, the first person to ever call her an alcoholic. A DWI led her into the legal system, replete with court-ordered IOP treatment and twice-weekly AA meetings. It was in Alcoholics Anonymous that Amanda finally faced her alcoholism and drug addiction, though she didn't get sober immediately. But that bellyful of booze and headful of AA was sufficient to trigger her moment of truth. She had a sudden spiritual experience of the kind Bill W. talks about in the Big Book. That was 3.5 years ago, when Amanda went all in the program of AA. She got a sponsor, worked all 12 steps multiple times, attended regular meetings, engaged in service work, and sponsored other women. Today she lives a full and rich life from the center of the program and can be seen after meetings arranging for informal get-togethers at local restaurants and other fellowship. I've known her since the earliest days of her sobriety, and I'm grateful to have had a front row seat watching this fellow alcoholic really get what AA is all about. Amanda's story at 3 years sober will inspire those with less time to stay regularly engaged in AA. For those with more time, her stories may make you reminisce of early years in sobriety. So, for newcomers, old-timers, and everyone in between, settle back for a comfortable listen to the 46th interview in this podcast series with my good friend and AA sister, Amanda B.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm a recovered alcoholic.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks for being here today. You and I have known each other probably for the last 4 or 5 years now, haven't we?
Yes, it's actually less than 4 or 5 years. I think I met you when I was about 9 months sober, and I had the courage to walk into a church meeting for the first time.
Oh, that was your first church meeting ever?
It was one of them.
Wow. So what's your sobriety date?
My sobriety date is February 18th, 2018. So I'm over the 3.5-year hump, which is so crazy to say out loud.
That's amazing. Well, I remember when you came into that meeting, you were a regular there for quite a while, and then I started seeing you at our Saturday evening meeting, which not only did you become a regular, but you were also kind of the social person afterwards, always asking people where they wanted to fellowship and go to dinner. And I thought that was so great, because on a Saturday evening at 7 o'clock, after an AA meeting is over, what do? And you always had people going out to restaurants and other things to fellowship. I think that's really marvelous. What gave you that idea?
Well, when I got sober, I left behind all of my party friends. And that first year, I was still so anxious and nervous. And I never went to any fellowship opportunities because I didn't know anybody. But in that Saturday night meeting, it was on Saturday night at 7 o'clock. And it made me depressed to go home and do nothing after that. So I'm like, you know what? This is a small enough meeting. I felt really comfortable there. I just love that meeting so much.
Yeah.
And I felt like, why not invite this group of awesome people to go out and enjoy each other's company and have some yummy food. And so we would all, Barbara and I would argue about which restaurant to go to, and I'd usually get my way, so that worked out. But it was really fun, and still making friendships at just over a year sober. Like, I needed that. I still need that fellowship. The book talks about that we crave that fellowship.
Yeah, we really do. And you not only created a real fellowship for people after the meeting to hang out, but whenever this COVID thing got started, you were ready to go with the Zoom for our group. And the Zoom that you helped coordinate got going much sooner than a lot of other Zoom groups did. And we were, within just a couple of weeks, we were already meeting on Zoom, our small group. So your service work, being the Zoom host and making sure that everything went smoothly, I think was terrific service work. Where did you learn how to do that service work?
Thanks. It was a great opportunity to be of service, and my higher power positioned me perfectly with a Zoom account through my job, who let me use it for, I worked at a treatment center. So they said, if you have any meetings that you want to use it for, I'm like, I do. So I was able to step right in to be of service. But to answer your question, my first sponsor in the program really drove home the service work. And it wasn't just program service work. It was other service work too. So she invited me, early on, I was maybe 3 or 4 months sober. Mm-hmm. And she invited me to go to this, barbecue that they have for homeless people. And I was like, well, I need to get out of the house. I'm just going to go, because that's really it wasn't up my alley at that point. Mm-hmm. And I went, and I just had the best time. And I mean, I was just talking to people, getting them to play cornhole and just having a good time. And after that was over, she said, wasn't that fun? I said, yeah, I just felt so genuine. Mm-hmm. And so that really stuck in my mind. And then she drove home, like, any opportunity you see to be of service, take it. And so also I was struggling with anxiety really bad at first. And I figured out, if I'm in a small group of people, like, I started going to church, and I would go to these small groups, and I was so nervous. I was like sweating and shaking when they would call on me to say something. Mm-hmm. And I figured out that if I could find a way to be of service, that took the pressure off. And so I started serving cake, serving drinks, arranging chairs, anything to get the focus off of me. And that has stuck with me. And now I find so much joy in being of service, just in every situation that I'm in. So that's a part of what I learned in the program that's translated into all areas of my life.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say that too, because there have been some people who I've interviewed over this podcast series who have spoken about the importance of service work to help them maintain their level of spiritual connectedness, connection to other people, and certainly keep them in the center of the program. And whether it's helping people fellowship after a meeting, or setting up chairs, or serving cake, or being the facilitator of a Zoom meeting, I can see how that could be very, very helpful to your sobriety. What do you think sobriety would have been like without that?
Without service work, I think sobriety would have been, filled with more anxiety. When I'm in service or being of service, I'm outside of myself. I'm not thinking about myself. I'm thinking about other people. Mm-hmm. And when I'm not being of service, I'm thinking about me, and I'm thinking about everyone that's thinking about me. And it just increases anxiety and unhappiness. Mm-hmm. And so really finding those opportunities to be of service just helps get me out of myself.
That's so important, especially since the disease of alcoholism is a disease of self-centeredness and selfishness, and being of service is selfless, it's helpful, it's really a blessing to any group to have somebody working the service end of things. Have you always been that kind of person during your life? Were you always the one who was helping out, or was your alcoholism keeping you from that kind of behavior?
So I grew up in a big-ish family. Mm-hmm. I have 3 siblings that we were raised in the same house. And so I'm the second oldest.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was always a helper in my family of origin.
Mm-hmm.
But as I got older, that went by the wayside. It was not a conscious skill
Mm-hmm.
that I had. The program really made me conscious of the benefits of service work.
So you've mentioned a little bit about your family of origin. What was your home life like in your family of origin, and in what ways might that have kind of put you on the path that you went on with alcoholism and drug abuse?
Yeah, so my very early years were really tumultuous. My parents got divorced when I was 6 months old. Mom got remarried when I was 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God, my first stepdad was he was a really good man, and he worked
Mm-hmm.
hard
Mm-hmm.
and provided what he could for our family. But where the alcohol piece comes in, he was not a big drinker, but my grandfather is a big drinker, and that whole side of the family. Every family event revolved around alcohol. And so like at our Christmases, we were the family that takes tequila shots. And, my mom looked at me sideways when I didn't take a drink on my 18th birthday. I can't tell you why I didn't. I think it was during the day and I didn't want to get tired for the afternoon because I had a party that night or something. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
But so there's that aspect that drinking is a way of life. I couldn't even imagine a life without alcohol in it. And I have one memory of one of my first drinks. I know I had my first drink very early on because there's a picture of me at like probably 3 years old drinking the last of a beer can. Yeah. And it was funny at the time, but now down the road, you look back and you're like, oh, maybe that was not a good idea. And then at 7 years old, my dad had made some margaritas, and I remember he gave me and my sister one, and I guess I was acting goofy and I asked him for more, and he goes, "You're already drunk. Ha ha ha." And I'm like looking back, like I was, and I wanted more. And then I have another memory of when I was 13, a little girlfriend that I had, we got a bottle of liquor, and my parents challenged us to try to finish the bottle in one night. And so we did. And I woke up in a pool of vomit, and I could never drink that specific liquor again. But from the very first drink, I've always had that I want more.
That is an incredible story that your parents challenged you and your friend to drink. What do you think was behind that challenge? What was it, just that it was funny or cute, or do you have any idea why?
So it was actually Crown Royal, which still makes my stomach turn when I say it. And I couldn't tell you why. I'm sure I had a little teenage attitude and I was like, I can drink, or I don't know what exactly happened. But again, drinking was a way of life. And so they probably thought, oh, they're here at the house. We're here. They'll be fine. And we were fine, except that I woke up in a pool of vomit and I can never drink that liquor again.
Now, did that experience with waking up that way, did you black out, or do you remember the night before? Do you remember much of what happened?
Yeah, I remember a lot of what happened. I don't know how I ended up in the bathroom. I was in the bathroom when I woke up, and then
Right.
I couldn't move for a little while, and I guess I was making some noises because my mom came and found me.
Uh-huh. What did you tell yourself after that experience? Obviously, you said you wanted more, but after that experience, did you tell yourself you still wanted more?
Yes.
Something different than Crown Royal?
Yes.
So that was at 13. Would you say that was really the beginning of your drinking by choice? Did you actually start at 13, or does it skip ahead a few years until you started drinking on your own?
Yeah, I guess, my story has outside substances in it.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a period of that only because of my age. If I would have been able to purchase my own alcohol, I would have. So until I found the right people and a fake ID, I used other substances. But probably when I turned 17, I could easily get access to alcohol. And it really took off then.
Yeah. So was your use of alcohol kind of an extension of the use of the drugs, or did you continue the drugs with the alcohol, or did one hand off to the next?
So I consider alcohol my primary substance of choice. Because I like the way it makes me feel, and it's easily accessible, and it can be fun or dressed up. Whereas the other substances are secondary, because I wouldn't take other substances out of fear of what's in them, unless I was drinking first.
So the alcohol use did, in a way, fuel additional use of drugs, but not necessarily the other way around, huh?
Right.
Did you have any consequences from your drinking early on? Were you running with a group that was drinking? What was your experience like with that?
Yeah, consequences. Some major ones I lost a scholarship to college. I started as pre-med at U of H, and I discovered clubs and decided to use a fake ID. I was only 16 when I started college, but at 17, I started going out to clubs and drinking, and the next morning I'd be like, I'm not going to class. And so, week after week, what does that equate to? I missed assignments, I missed classes, my grades plummeted, I lost my scholarship. So that was one major one.
So you were in college at 16? You must have been really, really ahead of the game and pretty smart to be able to do that.
So I don't consider myself smart. I consider myself a hard worker, because I didn't skip any grades. I just worked really hard in summer school and classes by correspondence through Texas Tech and UT. And then I was able to graduate early. So I just applied myself and focused so that I could get on to college. Really, I just wanted to get out of my parents' house and go, be an adult and do whatever I wanted. I wanted my freedom.
What were things like at home that made you want to get out of there at that point? You've talked about when you were 13. What was it like before you actually got out of the house?
So when I was 12, my mom divorced my first stepdad, and we moved in with her new boyfriend. And the new boyfriend was great. Before we moved in with him, he would buy us groceries and take us to do fun things. And then we moved in with him, and he flipped. So he became abusive, verbally abusive to me, physically abusive to my mom and my sister. And so I had to get out of there. In fact, I told my mom when I was 15, I was still in high school. I told my mom that either she was going to let me leave and go move in with my drug dealer boyfriend, or I was going to leave anyways and not talk to her anymore. And so she let me leave. Which that's a tough situation for a 15-year-old to be in. Do I stay in this abusive household? Or do I go live with my drug dealer boyfriend who can provide what I need, and I'll have a little more peace and not get abused by him, and he'll supply all my drugs?
What a choice that was for you. You went to live with him and he helped support your drug usage. Would you call it a drug habit at that point?
I would, because it was on the weekends. At that point, I was keeping it at the weekends. During the week, I would focus on school to finish out my high school. And so during the week, I was really focused. I had a little job at Chick-fil-A, my first job ever. They teach very good manners at Chick-fil-A, by the way.
They do, and they'll fire you in a heartbeat if they find out you're on drugs, won't they?
Yes. I don't remember doing a drug test for them, but that was ages ago. So that was a long time. I don't really remember doing a drug test, if I did or not. But yeah, I would keep my drug usage to the weekends. And that was when I started incorporating more alcohol, because this boyfriend was older. He was 21. And so I could get him to get alcohol for us.
I see. So by the time you started living with him and he not only provided the drugs but the alcohol, would you say you were becoming a functional alcoholic, or were things falling apart more quickly than that?
Well, things were falling apart pretty quickly. I mean, I look back and I'm amazed that I made it. I finished high school early and started college with a scholarship. that's incredible given the circumstances. But once I got to college and had my freedom, it went downhill really quickly.
Did you continue to live with him while you were going to college?
I did for the first semester. And then I started hanging out with a girlfriend of mine, and I started staying at her place more. And then just things weren't good with him. So when I turned 18, I got a job at a bar, and it was awesome. I could drink all day long. And that's when I officially dropped out of school and just decided to work there instead, and got my own apartment and thought I was all grown up.
I'm curious about that job, because I've had a number of people on the show who have followed somewhat of the same trajectory, where things seem to be going pretty well, but then they just made the conscious decision that they'd rather be in a position where they could drink all the time and not have to worry about class or any other considerations. When you were working in that bar, what were your ambitions? Did you want to go back to school, or what were you thinking when you were in that bar?
I was trying to manage. I was trying to go to school and work at the bar. And then I would wake up so hungover and be like, I'm just going to work at the bar.
Were you making pretty good money at the time?
Oh, yeah. I was making really good money. I mean, especially for being that young. I mean, my mom never made a whole lot of money. Neither did my dad. So seeing that kind of money coming in was definitely an influence on my decision.
Did you experience any problems or difficulties while you were working at the bar related to alcohol and drugs?
Oh, yeah. I got fired a couple times for drinking. I was underage. So I would drink, and there were a couple times that they fired me and then they let me come back. So that was probably the biggest consequences I had at that point in time. I really flew under the radar. I lived right across the street from the bar, so that made, driving under the influence minimally risky. It was 1 block away.
Wow. So you had the opportunity, without even having to get in a car, of drinking with impunity, as they say in the big book. Do you recall any feelings that your drinking was getting out of control and that you might have to do something about it? Or were you just sailing along, doing what you wanted to do?
So I remember a specific conversation I had when I was 22 years old. I was at this point living with my grandparents, trying to go back. I was back in school, and I went out like 2 nights in a row, and I remember drinking vodka out of a plastic bottle. And I think I had filled up my plastic bottle with my grandparents' vodka because I was 22 and a student, and I wasn't working at the bar anymore and didn't have money to afford drinks. So I just remember drinking it the whole night I was out, for the second night. And then when I got home, I kept drinking straight vodka out of this plastic bottle until I passed out. And the next morning, I had a little job at a boutique. And the next morning I had to call in. And when I went downstairs, I had this conversation with my grandma, and she's like, "Why are you not at work?" And I'm like, "I'm really hungover." And she's like, "I hope you didn't tell them that." I was like, "I did."
Oh, no.
And she's like, "Amanda," I was like, "I know, I really think I have a problem." And she goes, "I think so too." And that was that. That was the end of the conversation. There was no, "Hey, I've heard of this program called AA," or anything like that, which she had. Remind you, her husband is an alcoholic. So she's an Al-Anon, but she doesn't know it. She still doesn't know it.
Right, I get it.
Yeah, so there was no solution there. And, as an alcoholic left to our own devices, we're not going to make it.
So you went from being at the bar to living at your grandparents' to go back to school. Was that a conscious decision you made, or something that came after you were fired for the last time and needed to do something else?
Well, I met a boy, and he happened to be a really good person, and he influenced me to get an education, and he influenced me to move back in with my grandparents, as, this is a way to set yourself up for success in the future. And I know it's not ideal, but you should go stay with your grandparents. It's really close to school. You don't have to pay rent. They actually gave me money for groceries every week too. So that helped. Yeah. So they were really trying to help me get out of this rut that I was in. And I was encouraged by this guy I met to get out of the bar scene and get back into school and try to make something with my life.
So what were the school years like while you were living with your grandparents?
I didn't live with my grandparents for too long. I broke up with the guy and I went back to the bar. But this time I was managing school and drinking. I had just dropped the drugs out of my life, but the constant here is alcohol. So I kept drinking, but somehow managed to make it through college. Yeah. So I graduated, I studied international business, and I graduated, when I was 24. So okay. I like to think that's not that far behind.
Well, given what you were going through at the time, you started at 16 and ended at 24. That's about an 8-year education. But so you're at 24, you've graduated, you've essentially replaced the drugs with alcohol, and sounds to me like you were a pretty functional alcoholic if you could complete your studies and get a degree.
Yeah. I guess so. It's hard to believe that because that's not what it looked like at the end of my drinking career. I was barely functioning, but that's the progression of the disease.
So what happens to your life after you graduate? You're 24 years old. That kind of led you down that road towards alcoholism to the extent that you needed to go to AA.
Yeah. So after college, I did an internship in Argentina for several months, and I had this little apartment there in this really cool hipster neighborhood, and there were bars all around me, and I was in heaven. I could go to these cool little bars and drink to my heart's content. I didn't do a whole lot of my internship while I was there, as you can imagine. I just went out and drank and then slept in the next day and ate all the delicious food that they make in Argentina. And then I came back because both of my sisters were pregnant and having babies within a few months of each other. So I came back, and it was hard to find a job fresh out of college and, having a bar on my resume, which I conveniently left off of my resume. And so while I was in college, I also did modeling and trade show work. And so I started picking up customers for marketing materials and cold calling, kind of sales work that they didn't want to hire someone for, but I would pick up these little projects. So I did that for a while, which was great because then I could drink however late I wanted and then sleep in and then do my work. So I got to make my own schedule. So I wouldn't have made it at a full-time job had I had one.
So you got to schedule your drinking around the job, or only drink after hours, or did you ever drink while you were on the job?
Yeah, sometimes with clients, I'd go meet them out for happy hour. And I always knew it wasn't just a happy hour. Like if I'm going to happy hour, I'm going to be out all night. And it never failed. It never failed. If I went to happy hour, I might, leave the clients I was with, but go with other friends out somewhere else. And then the next day pay for it. And then I'd be behind in my planned work. But I was able to keep that up for a good while, because I had that flexibility.
So you were kind of putting together your own schedule, working when you wanted. Did you have that kind of flexibility?
Yeah. And I would schedule meetings in the afternoons on purpose because I knew I would be hungover in the morning and not able to get up and do the meeting.
When did you notice, or did you notice, alcohol and your drinking taking a toll on your life, either physically or emotionally or spiritually?
So I hadn't noticed it yet, but I had a neighbor when I was 27. I had this neighbor who had this beautiful dog, and I have dogs. And so I met him out walking dogs in our little apartment dog park. And he would talk to me about this fellowship that he was a part of. And this guy was always happy and smiling and glowing. And I'm like, why is this guy so happy? And so, and he was so warm and kind. And he would tell me about this fellowship that he would go to. And eventually I put two and two together and I figured out it was AA. And cause he told me he hadn't drank in 4 years. And I was like, 4 years? How is that even possible? And so he invited me probably maybe three times. Because I would always tell him like, oh man, I'm so hungover today. I have the biggest headache. I would ask him to bring me water or juice or whatever when I couldn't get out of bed. And so he invited me about 3 times. And I remember saying like, oh, I want to go, but not today, maybe another time. Mm-hmm. And I think he gave up after a few times of asking me. He was like, she's not ready yet. But I say that was my higher power sending a life raft, and I didn't take it. I had to go further down.
Mm-hmm. So here's a guy who introduces you to AA. Was it that you just felt like you didn't have a problem or couldn't relate to what he was doing?
At that point, I knew that my drinking was a little much. Which is why I would tell him, I want to go, just not today. Cause I did want to go. I wanted to check it out and see what it's about. I never thought that I would be able to be sober for 4 years, but I was curious about it. And there was just a tiny little seed of openness there. It just wasn't ready to flourish yet.
Did he ever ask you that $64,000 question that we ask people? Do you feel like you have a drinking problem, or do you want to stop drinking?
No, he never asked if I think I have a drinking problem that I remember. And I think I would remember because one time my sister told me a little further down the road from this story at 27, she straight up told me, you're an alcoholic. And I remember it hurting me. It hurt so bad. And I was so ashamed. And I don't remember feeling that ever with him. He was so kind and like gentle and just invited me to come along. And, he would come talk to me when I'm hungover. I would hide from him in the parking lot because we had this parking garage. And I remember like when I was hungover, I would try to hide from him so he couldn't see me walk in to say hi because I was so ashamed. I was hungover again.
When your sister told you that, what was behind what she was saying? Did she cite behavior on your part that she determined made you an alcoholic? What was your understanding of what she said when she told you were an alcoholic? What was she seeing? So
my sister is a nurse, and she had just finished nursing school, and she had been to one AA meeting. So she recognized the craving. And she recognized that once I took a drink, I was going to drink the whole bottle. And also at that time, this is when I was hitting my bottom at this point. Mm-hmm. I actually had moved in with her. I was not functioning anymore. I went back to work at the bar just to make ends meet. And I ended up getting a DWI one night, my first DWI, first and only, thank God. And so the judge put me in this, I violated twice on my pretrial supervision. And at this point I was on a bunch of different pills and alcohol. So before my urinalysis tests, I would drink the stuff that would get rid of that would cover up the other stuff in the urine test. But I didn't know that it didn't cover up alcohol. And so I got caught. And so I violated twice on pre-trial supervision. And so when it came time, the judge said, this was 9 months after I got arrested. The judge said, hey, I really think this girl can benefit from the DPTI program, which it has you jump through several hoops. One is you go to IOP. One is you go to AA. And I don't remember the others. And so if you jump through all the hoops successfully and you don't mess up again for 2 years, your case will be dismissed. And I was like, yes, please, I'll take it. Wow. So I did that, but I had moved back in with my sister after getting the DWI because my life was just totally unmanageable. I couldn't support myself anymore, and she needed help with her daughter babysitting, which actually didn't work out either because I was always too drunk to babysit. So,
oh, boy.
Yeah.
Did she trust you with babysitting?
She did trust me with babysitting until I wasn't able to show up like she needed me to and be trustworthy like she needed me to be.
I see. So you're 27, you're living with your sister, you've had the DWI, you've been ordered to do this DPTI, and did you start to attend AA meetings as part of that?
Yeah, so I was actually 29 at this point, which is important to me because I always told myself that in my 20s, I'm going to live it up. I'm going to do whatever the heck I want. I'm going to travel the world, drink as much as I want, do all the substances I want. And if I'm still alive, at 30, I'm going to straighten up. So I didn't realize how hard it would be to quit all that stuff.
That sounds like a real plan, Amanda. A little bit convoluted, but a plan nonetheless.
Yeah. So I'm living with my sister. I'm 29. I started going to AA meetings in November of 2017. I remember part of the PTI program required me to go to, I think it was 2 or 3 meetings a week for 6 weeks. And so I would do that. And after the meeting, I felt like I had a choice whether I was going to drink or not. And so I figured out 4 days before you have a urinalysis test is when you have to stop drinking so that it doesn't show in the test. So I started going to AA meetings 4 days in a row leading up to my test so I could pass my test, and then I would drink again.
So it was a scheduled test, not a random?
Yeah, and they did random sometimes, but luckily I evaded that somehow. I think I got called once for a random and somehow got out of it.
So you were able to play the system there for a little while, huh?
For a little while. That is not sustainable. I'm not recommending that to anyone.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions, missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. Earlier you mentioned that you were rapidly approaching your bottom. What did your bottom look like, and what do you remember about the days prior to hitting that bottom?
Well, let's see. I mean, prior to hitting that bottom was having to live with my sister at 29 years old, not able to support myself. I had a breathalyzer in my car, which is so embarrassing. I didn't have any money, even though I was back working at the bar and making a lot of money, but it was all going to debts and the courts, and my life was just completely unmanageable. And then my sister, when she said that about me being an alcoholic, and it hurt so bad, and then what she said about the craving, that struck a chord. I was like, I didn't say it out loud at the time because I didn't want her to be right. But when she said that about the craving, after you have the first drink, you have a craving for more. I'm like, that's me. So deep down there was that. And then, starting AA, I don't know, I guess in that 6 weeks, I heard what I needed to hear. I remember trying to do it on my own for the next couple months. I remember the first AA meeting I went to where I didn't have to get my paper signed, and I made sure everybody in the room knew that.
Okay. What was that, 6 months getting it signed?
No, it was 6 weeks of getting it signed, which is not that long. So after that, I started going to meetings on my own without a requirement, because I liked how I felt when I left the meetings. I liked the peace that I got, and just like hugs. There were no hugs in my life, and just having people come up to me and hug me and tell me it's going to be okay. Like, I needed that. And then leading up to, I still hadn't quit drinking. I still hadn't asked for a sponsor. I was trying to do it on my own. I tried to look up the 12 steps, like a workbook online, and I don't know why I couldn't find it. So I was still trying to do it on my own. But I remember someone said in a meeting, if you want to get sober, just ask God to get you sober. And so I started doing that. As soon as I would wake up, I would just sit up, and I didn't have a higher power at this point. I was agnostic. I thought maybe there's something. I mean, there's probably something, but that's way too big for my little mind to comprehend. So I just did what they said. I sat up in bed and I prayed to the ceiling, and I was like, God, please get me sober. And I just meant sober off of alcohol. I wasn't ready to give up the pills yet, but the pills went first.
They did.
Yeah. A month before my sobriety date from alcohol, I got sober from the pills. I went through withdrawal. I didn't go to a detox center or anything. Again, don't recommend that to anyone. It was miserable and painful. But I needed to go through that so that I remember how awful it was.
Were those opioids that you were detoxing from?
Yes.
Wow, that's tough. And you did that on your own.
Yes.
That must have been miserable.
It was very miserable. And then I was also on Adderall, which I have the same sobriety date. The day that I got sober from alcohol, I also got sober from Adderall.
So you did it all at once then, huh?
Yeah.
That's amazing. What was it like when you went to your first meetings? You said you felt a lot better leaving than you did going in. And to me, that's a sign of a good AA meeting, when people feel better walking out than they did when going in. What did you notice about the people? Did you make friends? Were there women that approached you? What was that like?
So at this point, I was still not comfortable with women. I didn't trust them, as most women that come into AA are. We just don't trust other women.
Yeah.
It takes a while for that to happen. But I was going to Lambda, and all the gay guys were so nice to me, and I loved them, and they were great. And I just remember walking into meetings, and the glow that neighbor of mine had. All of these people had that glow, and I'm like, what is this? And they're smiling and laughing, and I'm like, are they really sober? Like, how can you be so happy sober? Yeah. I didn't get it, but I didn't care. I only cared about what I felt like after I left the meeting. I felt better, and I had a choice whether I was going to drink or not that night. Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the Lambda Club, I've known a number of women over the years who have, become regulars at their meetings. You mentioned that it's an issue for women, other women. What were you noticing about the women in AA that became so difficult, that gave you concern?
So I wouldn't say that I had concerns about the women in AA. Everyone was so kind and nice and went way out of their way to help me. It was me. Yeah. And my trust level of other women had been so, destroyed. Based on these unhealthy relationships that I'd had with women, throughout my life. And so that was my stuff that I carried in the rooms. It was not the women in the rooms. And it took me a long time, and I still struggle with that. I still struggle making friends with women in the program. But it's something that I'm very aware of and working on, and healing. There's healing that's happening. So it just takes time.
I get that. So tell me about your first sponsor. Did you get a sponsor right away, or how long did it take? It sounds to me like you were trying to work the program yourself for a period of time. How long did you do that before you finally got yourself a sponsor?
So it was about 4 months of coming to AA, trying to do it on my own, promising, begging, and pleading God to help me go into a bar and not drink. That didn't work. I don't know. It was on February 16th of 2018. There was a woman that led this meeting.
Uh-huh.
And I consider her my temporary sponsor because my first real sponsor comes later. But
Right.
I asked her on February 16th, I went up to her right after the meeting and I said, hey, I need help. Can you sponsor me? And she was like, okay, well, tell me what's going on. I was like, okay, I just need help. I can't do this on my own. And so we met 2 days later.
Uh-huh.
On February 18th, and I was hungover once again. The night before, I had gone into the bar, and before I went in, I was, trying to be a good AA, and I prayed and asked God to keep me sober.
Yeah.
And then I walked into a bar. Yeah. So I didn't know that that's not supposed to do that in early sobriety. So I met with this temporary sponsor on February 18th. I was really hungover, and she was like, okay, you're going to start a 90 and 90 and you're going to order the big book right now.
Did she know that you hadn't stopped at that point, or did she assume you were sober?
I told her that I drank the night before.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
And so I said, okay, so this 90 and 90, does that start today? And she's like, yep. I'm like, okay. So I go to Lambda, that night, and I feel awful. And, I'm sitting it's a fairly empty meeting. There's maybe 10, 12 people in there. Mm-hmm. It was a Sunday night. And so there's all these open chairs. It's in the big room over there.
Oh, yeah.
There's all these open chairs, and this, of course, this glowing, fabulous woman walks in the door, and she comes and sits right next to me. And I'm like, why is she sitting right next to me when there's a ton of other chairs in here? And so after this meeting, she stayed after and talked to me. And she was talking about how her vision changed when she was about 4 months sober. And for whatever reason, her saying that gave me a lot of hope, and I still can't tell you why. It gave me a lot of hope. But then I went home that night, and I was crying. I was desperate because I had really given this thing a shot on my own. And I just couldn't stop. And so that night I'm just like crying, and remind you, I'm still agnostic at this point. And I put my hands out in defeat.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I literally said this out loud. There has to be something greater than me, because I can't do this on my own. And at that moment, I had a very intense spiritual experience, and my higher power came flooding into my life. I could feel the presence around me and through me, this like warm comfortableness. And I had like a waterfall of tears and snot come out. And I journaled that night. So I have a journal from my sobriety date, and in my journal it says, I know it was God.
Wow. So God drops this woman in your life, and as a result of that experience, you have the spiritual experience, the kind that Bill Wilson talks about, right?
Yes.
A sudden upheaval.
It's page 56 in the big book. That's my favorite page, because I was reading it a couple months later. I was reading it and I was like, oh, that happened to me.
So yours wasn't one of the gradual, of the educational variety. Yours was a sudden realization of a presence greater than yourself.
Yes, it was. And so from that moment, I was all in.
And that was what day?
February 18th of 2018.
So that's your sobriety day.
Yeah. And so I had the temporary sponsor for my first 60 days, and I was sitting on step 1 because she was very busy. Obviously, the program gives us a lot of life. We get to do a lot of things after we're sober. And so this woman was very busy. And so I was sitting on step 1, and 60 days sober. I was friends with this woman that sat next to me and told me about vision on my sobriety date. And so on day 60, I was a mess, and I saw her at a meeting, and I told her, I said, if this is what it's like to be sober, I don't want it. And she said, no. Let me sponsor you. Give me a month. And I said, okay. So I notified the other lady that I was going to take her as my official first sponsor and work the steps with her. And we got right into the work, and I had to get through my 4th step as quick as possible because I wasn't going to make it if I didn't.
So that was 60 days after your sobriety day that she becomes your sponsor?
Yeah, on my 60-day birthday.
Wow. So you had this sudden spiritual experience. You go back to AA. Were those 60 days of struggle for you before you finally got your permanent sponsor?
Yes.
What were those days like?
Oh, man. I slept a lot. I was still withdrawing from the Adderall stays in your system for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't know the half-life, but recovering from Adderall, it takes a long time. And so my body was totally exhausted. I had no energy. So I slept a lot. I drank a pot of coffee a day. I wasn't working at this point. I was selling some of my fancy stuff that I had bought over the years. I was selling so that I could pay my bills. And I was just staying sober one day at a time.
Were you going to meetings every day?
I was. The 90 and 90, I followed that. And it really, that kept me sober. But yeah, I just kind of turned into I isolated. I cut myself off from everybody except for AA. Cause I knew I would go out again if I didn't do that. And so I just fell off the map.
So this is 60 days into your sobriety. During that period of time, you're feeling isolated. You're feeling alone. You're still going to AA. What was it like having those feelings while you were sitting in the middle of an AA meeting?
It was hard. But at that club that I was going to, they were really accepting and just wanted me to check in with how I was doing that day. So I didn't know how to share. I didn't have any program to share at this point other than I'm praying and I'm sober and I'm here. But I would share also, the anxiety levels and the shaking and I mean, my shares were definitely not filled with experience, strength, and hope at this point.
Yeah. I kind of identify with you in a way. I know you've heard my story before, but I didn't get a sponsor until I was sober about 10 months, almost a year. I was sitting in meetings seeing people really getting it around me and people that they seemed like their lives were improving while I was still feeling isolated, alone, because I was trying to do the program my way without a sponsor and without any help or acknowledgement that I couldn't do it myself, But, I remember what a empty feeling that was, sitting in meetings, knowing that I wasn't getting what everybody else was getting. And it made me feel like maybe I'll be the first guy to prove that AA doesn't work, or maybe I'll be just one of those lost causes along the way. Did you ever get that feeling when you were sitting in the meetings, or were you a little bit more hopeful than that?
I think I was a little more hopeful because remember that goal that I had? If I made it to 30, I would straighten up.
Yeah.
So I turned 30 years old at 56 days sober. And so I had this drive that I'm not giving up. Like if it worked for all these people, it's going to work for me too.
Yeah.
And so I just held out hope and I was praying at the time. So I think that helped me a lot. Also at 11 days sober, I met this woman and she talked about the 3rd step prayer. And so while I was not on the 3rd step yet, I had that prayer memorized and I was saying it every day. And that carried me.
Wow. So you were going to meetings, you weren't drinking, which are the first 2 requirements that I think everything else is built off of. You had that spiritual experience. You connected with people in the meetings, though you were somewhat isolated. But finally, at 60 days, you get this woman who becomes your sponsor. That must have been a big exhale for you at that point.
Oh my gosh, it's a big exhale for me now. She was just this amazing woman, so kind and sweet. And I thought I was the type of person that needed one of those hard ass sponsors. But no, I needed someone who was gentle and kind and sweet. I was really hard on myself already.
Yeah.
And so having her to gently guide me through the steps, and she had a lot of time to spend with me, which I needed. I needed guidance. I needed conversations. I needed a mentor, a sponsor, a good sponsor that had time for me. And she had that. And so she really, I thank her to this day. Every sobriety birthday, I send her a long text and I'm like, thank you so much for spending all that time with me. I know I was not great company, but I needed that. Yeah.
So she put you to work on the 12 steps right away, huh?
She did. And like she said, give me a month. And we were at step 5 within a month.
So had you written out your 4th step before the month mark?
Yes.
Okay. So you did your 4th step. What do you remember about doing your 4th step? Was that, did you find that was difficult or easy? What were your concerns when you got to that step?
It was hard. I didn't want to dig up all the stuff from the past that I thought, whatever, that doesn't matter. It was in the past. I really didn't want to dig all of that up. But I listened. I took every suggestion that she gave, every suggestion. And so her suggestion was that I plan my whole weekend to just stay home, turn off my phone, and do my 4th step. And so I did that, and the feelings that come up are not fun to sit with.
Oh, yeah.
But she warned me about that, and she said, light a candle, take breaks to breathe, walk your dogs, pray. So she gave me suggestions on how to get through those hard feelings. And it took me more than 1 weekend. It took me 2 weekends, actually. And then we met, I think it was on a Saturday, to do my 5th step, and that was a month later.
What was that like for you?
Wow. It was humbling.
Yeah.
Very humbling to talk about, these deep hurts, and then to look at my part of it was hard. It was hard. I think that does get easier with time, looking at ourselves. It was painful, but I had minimal tears, and the presence of my higher power was very near. And I just, I was at peace. And when we finished it, I felt amazing. And in the book, it talks about we'll be able to look others in the eye again. And that was so true for me. I remember the next day I went for a walk around the bayou. And I'm like smiling and I'm looking at people like trying to make eye contact. So like, say hi. And that was not me before. I was looking at the ground.
Wow. That's so powerful. One of my fondest memories of doing the 5th step, and I've done several of them, but the most powerful part of that particular process is maybe for the first time having somebody sit there and listen non-judgmentally and knowing that irrespective of what I say, whatever the deepest, darkest, most hideous thing I could say is met with understanding and acceptance. That's a feeling I never knew in my life until that point.
Yeah, I had never experienced that either. I worked my way up to the darker stuff. So at first, I kept it light, and I was, testing to see, is she going to freak out? And she didn't. She just sat there calmly and listened to me. And she was so kind and understanding. And some of them, she was like, me too. And I was like, wow.
Yeah, that me too is a powerful statement for a listener to a 5th step to make. And I've had that opportunity before too. And that's so important. So you got through your 5th step. 6 and 7?
Yeah, right after. I went home and did my hour of, meditation and the work that needs to be done, and said my 7th step prayer. And then 8th step. Yeah, I sat on that for a little while.
Did you?
Yeah, because the first time you do the steps, you've got you've got a long list.
Yeah, that's true.
And so being willing to make all of those amends, it took me a little while to get there, but I got there.
Yeah, did you work pretty closely with her throughout that process?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I needed to. And, the 9th step, making my amends, this was the first time I had worked the steps. I've worked the steps since. But this first time I was so terrified to make those amends. Even after I saw how they went with, the first couple, I was still terrified to make the others. But never once have I had a bad experience with amends. Never once. And I've done the steps 3 times now. That 9th step is so powerful in healing relationships.
So by the time you got through doing the 9th step and then doing it again and again, how do you feel about the 9th step today, about doing a 9th step amend, if you do find one you need to make?
I love it. I have to humble myself. So I got to get over that little hump of pride. But once I squash that, humble myself and make the approach, I know what's on the other side of it. And there is a spiritual high on the other side of it. And I'm an alcoholic. I love a good high. So I look forward to that part of it.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And all the healing that can go on, and a certain amount of forgiveness and other things. Although, I always have been told, and I tell the men that I sponsor with regard to the 9th step, to go in with super low expectations. Better to be pleasantly surprised when it goes well, as opposed to completely crushed when you have your expectations so high and they don't forgive you right away, or they throw you out or something like that. I've had guys I've sponsored who've tried to make 9th step amends and literally been thrown out or said, don't come see me again ever, that kind of thing. That can be a kind of a hurtful thing to have happen, but it sounds to me like you got through yours without that kind of response from the people you were making your 9th step amends to, huh?
Yeah, I guess I've been fortunate in that way. And I mean, that would be really painful to go and admit your wrongs and then have the other person, be resentful toward you or mean or spiteful. I have not experienced that yet. But it's always a possibility. And my sponsor says all we can do is clean up our side of the street.
That's right.
That makes me right with my higher power. What the other guy says doesn't matter.
That's such a smart way to think about it, too. That's exactly in line with the way I think about it as well. So this kind of brings us full circle, Amanda, to the point where we were talking earlier about your service work. And one of the pieces of service work, what we can do is sponsoring other people. Have you had the experience of sponsoring other women?
I have.
What's that been like for you?
Oh, man. It is the highlight of my life. I have to be careful to not get too excited for my sponsees in case they don't make it. But
yeah.
Gosh, what a gift it is to see the light bulb come on. And every time I'm going to meet with a sponsee, I don't know why this is, but I'm like, oh, I hope they cancel. I hope they cancel. Oh, my selfishness and self-centeredness is coming through. I have so much to do. I hope they cancel. And then I'll pray, God, please, bring them. I really need to see them. Yeah. And so they come. And then afterwards, I'm so happy. I just have a heart full of joy. Nothing brings me as much joy as that. Maybe other than seeing my niece born, that was pretty awesome. But this is another form of life coming to life. And, it's just so exciting. And I'm so thankful that I get to be a part of that and I get to serve God in that way.
That's such a powerful statement, too. And to have that kind of enthusiasm and joy in the process of sponsoring other people, I don't think it's possible to have that unless you've already gotten it from your sponsor and passing it down the road. Do you have any grand sponsees? Have any of your sponsees started sponsoring other women yet?
Not yet, but I'm hopeful that'll happen maybe in the new year where my girls are now in the steps. Cool. I'm hoping probably in the new year I'll have a grand sponsee.
That's a whole new experience of joy and pleasure as well, to be able to see people doing so well with their own sobriety that they can literally pass it on as being a good sponsor to somebody else. So it sounds to me, Amanda, that you've had quite a few gifts come up in your life. Can you tell me of any others that kind of stick out at this point, that looking back, you might have sold yourself short if you had thought that it wasn't going to happen? What kind of other gifts have occurred for you since sobriety?
Oh my goodness. There's so many that I wouldn't choose or ask God for what I have today. So let's see. We can start with my job. I have my dream job now. I stepped into the role in May of this year. After a couple years of working those early sobriety jobs, I worked at a treatment center in an admin position. I really hated it.
Yeah.
But there was benefit that came out of that. I mean, I learned how to manage money better. I had a very supportive team. There was healing there with women in the workplace. A lot of good came out of that. But the job that I stepped into is more than what I asked my higher power for. And it's something that is deeply meaningful to me, and only God would have known. The position was actually created for me, which is crazy that someone would create a position for me.
Yeah, they saw something in you, didn't they?
They must have. I don't know what it was, but I'm glad they did.
When you get jobs created for you, that's such a compliment and such a great sign of God working in your life that people notice to the extent that they're willing to create a whole job around it. That's marvelous.
Yeah. Other gifts. Let's see. Well, I met this wonderful man at your meeting.
Yes.
And again, I wouldn't have chosen him. My picker is off, but just the way everything happened, and it was totally God. We've been dating for over 2 years now, and he's just a really amazing person. And I love that he works a program, and we have this in common. And he's just a wonderful guy, and so sweet and kind and thoughtful and willing to look at himself. And that is the most attractive quality about him, which I would have never thought that before I got sober. Like, oh, he's willing to look at himself. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, I get that. That's something that in a lot of ways is kind of special too and unique about Alcoholics Anonymous, is that one of the things we need to be doing on an ongoing basis is looking at ourselves. And if we're not looking at ourselves, the people we've surrounded ourselves with are looking at us to reflect back to us what we're really doing in our lives. So that's really that's a marvelous statement. Sounds like God had a hand in that for you as well, huh?
Absolutely.
Because I remember when you started coming to that meeting for the first time, and he hadn't started coming to that meeting yet. Or maybe you must have met him shortly after he started coming to that meeting, huh?
Well, he said that he was going to that meeting for a while, and then he stopped. And that must have been when I started going.
Oh, yeah.
And then someone told him that there was an attractive blonde going there, so he decided to come back.
Well, never let it be said that there aren't a few ulterior motives, though knowing the man, I'm sure they were very noble and kind, at the heart of it. So that's a beautiful gift to be able to have somebody else that is working a good AA program. It's so rare. And, given the number of people who are in the program who have significant others, boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses that are not supportive, or if they're not supportive, they're ambivalent. To be able to have somebody that you can speak to has got to be a really comforting feeling.
It is. And also, when I'm off the beam, he can spot it and call me on it. And that helps because I can't always see that myself. It helps to have him to be able to spot when I'm irritable, restless, or discontent. And it helps when he can give me program language. Like if I'm stressing out about, 2 months from now, or I just recently had a surgery and, I had to take narcotics and I was really worried about it. And he's like, one day at a time. Call your sponsor, are you checking this in with your sponsor? And just having that reinforcement there is such a gift.
Yeah. Another one of those God things for sure. Well, for someone with 3.5 years after what you went through to get to AA, what a blessing it is to have you in the program, and what a blessing it is for the program to be in your life. And I've watched you grow and change over the last several years, and to me, there's no greater demonstration of God's working in our lives than someone working a really good AA program. And it sounds to me like that's what you're doing. I mean, I see it when I see you. I see it in your eyes. I see it in your behavior around other people too. And you can always tell how people really are by the way you see them treating other people. And you're so kind and loving to the members of the groups that you and I go to. And you're very receptive to their approach, which is the reason why you've got sponsees and you're working that particular part of the program. So I just love the fact that you and I have had a chance to get to know each other a little bit better today. This is something we haven't done, but one of the advantages of doing these interviews is I get to spend an hour and 10 minutes with people who I love. And I love you, and you're a really special person in my life. And you certainly enhance and brighten up the meetings that we go to together. And I'm sure your other meetings as well. And what I would say to anybody with 3.5 years is keep on keeping on, stay in the middle of the herd, and remember that all of us want you to succeed just as you want the people around you to succeed. And I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Wow. Thank you, Howard. That was so kind. And you are such a blessing to the program as well. I just love your shares and your heart and how you love people, and you're not scared to say it. And I love you too, Howard.
Thank you. That means a lot to me.
Thanks.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? Think of it as a little AA service that spreads the word about this rich and meaningful listening experience. It's yet another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. Visit my website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, where you can listen to every episode of AA Recovery Interviews. And if you want to contact me directly with any comments or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.